With that, I want to bring on the line a real hero in our movement. Dan Stockin has been working on this for years and years and years, and he was a guest on a teleconference earlier in this year. I am so glad to know you, Dan, and it was wonderful to be with you in person last weekend in our nation's capital during the 5th Citizen Conference on fluoride that was organized by FAN. You were the last speaker on Sunday, and boy, did you cause quite a stir with this information. So say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone. I'm a public health guy. I got pulled into the fluoride issue about 10.5 years ago, sort of sideways, when my boss at the time got a skin rash on her arm. And we were both new to the Nashville area at the time. We had just moved there. And she was very intuitive by nature. And she saw these signs on the side of the road that said approved fluoridated drinking water. And neither one of us had ever been in a fluoridated area before. So she called me into her office and said, was it possible that this fluoride she was now showering in and drinking could be causing the rash that the doctors couldn't fix? That's the only reason I got pulled into this particular issue, even though my background was in toxics assessment and hazmat. My job was to analyze what chemicals do to people's bodies. And so it just goes to show you, even though I've worked with some pretty dangerous things in my career, biologic agents, radioactive materials, hazardous chemicals, etc., it just goes to show you that people in the sciences can have very little information about this subject. There's been a pretty good selling job done on the issue of fluorides being sort of good and safe and mom's apple pie and all-American. So I dove into this and without any sort of preconceived ideas, except for, I just applied the techniques that we had applied for hundreds of other chemical exposures in my career and what the target organs are in your body and what how your body metabolizes these chemicals, et cetera. So this was a no-brainer to me as soon as I looked into it. It was clear that this should not be in our drinking water. But my boss told me that she didn't feel it was morally right for us to take steps to protect our own families and yet not care about the people around us. So she uttered these fateful words, at least in my life. She said, I don't know who you have to talk to, get it turned off. And I had no idea where this was going to go, but you can fast forward 10.5 years later and still heavily involved in it. And we've had some great things happen, and so many other neat people that I've met have done some amazing work, including being involved even in this FOIA process. So I just want to say that some people recognize my name, but I'm not interested in anybody recognizing my name. I just want this fluoride thing to get over with. And so what I wanted to share today was the presentation that I made at last Sunday's Fluoride Action Network conference. And hopefully you'll be able to see the slides. Clint, are we there yet? Or I don't see it on my screen yet.
No, I'm getting feedback that people are still only seeing my Facebook page, and I'm not sure why. But as an alternative, what I'm doing is I'm uploading the document to a place on the Internet, on the web, that people then will be able to download, and then they'll have it on their computer, and they could follow along that way.
Okay.
So go ahead and begin your presentation.
Sure. I'll just start by saying that this issue, what we did, and like I say, there were some other super people that helped with this, and I'm not sharing their names at the moment. But what the process was is we at the Lilly Center, we were really interested in certain aspects of harm from the fluoridated water. And we were interested in seeing what some of the communications were inside HHS, the Health and Human Services Agency, which is the parent organization for the Centers for Disease Control. And there was also some communications we wanted to see inside the Centers for Disease Control itself. And then there was a couple of specific things about sort of the administrative process as to how the Centers for Disease Control has looked at fluorides and how they managed to come up with the statements that they make about fluoridated drinking water. So what I wanted to share is that I've learned sort of through hard experience not to tell everything that I know. I kind of wait until the fat lady sings, proverbial fat lady, if you will, because sometimes I find that some of the folks who are pushing water fluoridation, I guess I'll say this kind of carefully, they're not very forthright all the time. Let's leave it like that. And we did find out that there were some things that they definitely did not want people to be looking at too closely, kind of like sore points or their Achilles heel of water fluoridation. This is just my opinion, and there's so many ways, some cool ways so many ways to look at the issue of harm from water fluoridation. But what I was interested in doing all along is using the fluoridation promoters' words against them, their own words. And I've been in public health for more than 25 years, and I know that people inside the public health community, they have some pretty frank discussions sometimes, and they don't always say publicly what they mean, what they have said in private. So what we have assembled over a period of years, and a whole bunch of other people have been involved in this, neat people in the Fluoride Action Network, others, that have helped assemble a group of documents. When you look at them, they paint a timeline. They give us sort of a thing that you can look at from a period from way back in the 50s all the way up to the present to see how particularly the dental industry, the dental lobby, if you will, has dealt with the issue of fluoride harm, both inside the mouth and to tissues outside the mouth. So since you're not seeing my slides in front of you, at least just yet, I'm going to start slowly talking about, maybe we'll get up to speed here on catching up with these. I want to talk a little bit about two things. There's Freedom of Information Act requests and then other documents which augment the Freedom of Information Act requests. And some of those documents I haven't shared. Some of them I have. And as I mentioned before, it just sounded kind of useful not to share everything I know. And what you can see is that if you go into this, back in 2005 and before, the Centers for Disease Control on its website was, emphatically telling people that visited the website that, quote, extensive research had shown water fluoridation to be safe. Extensive research. And, so everyone has kind of bought into that whole idea. And the problem was there was certain research that we found that contradicted their statements. And what we did at the Lilly Center in 2007 is we filed a formal ethics complaint with the joint CDC ethics committees. And it was a real interesting process because I found out at the time that the average citizen apparently had never really been participating when they could have been in the ethics committee meetings at the Centers for Disease Control. And so we delineated, we gathered a whole bunch of CDC's own statements, their own statements from their website and other documents, and we showed that CDC was violating its own ethics policy in how they promoted water fluoridation. And we cited some really specific things. One of the key issues that we cited was the fact that there was disproportionate harm to African Americans from ingesting fluorides in drinking water and from other sources. It just made sense to me. This is something Dr. Lilly turned me on to one day. She just was inspired. She said, we really need to get the black community involved and the minority communities because this will help end water fluoridation. So I began to kind of go where that took me, and it took me to some interesting places. And so now a series of things you may have heard, some of you that are listening, some organizations and key individuals, high-profile people, et cetera, in various positions of visibility or leadership in the minority communities have called for a halt to water fluoridation. So what we did is we presented the ethics complaint, and the CDC responded after quite a number of months. They responded by basically saying our ethics committees don't handle ethics complaints. So they said, we're going to give it to one of these associate directors or one of their big shots who was a couple steps down from the director of CDC. In other words, the guy who was going to reply was going to be evaluated by the man who was, by the lady who was named in the complaint. So he was a couple steps down from the director of the CDC. I think it was associate director for science. And this seemed kind of not so great, not very smart, but it also was kind of predictable that they exonerated themselves completely. Well, and they didn't touch the issue of harm to minorities with a 10-foot pole. They were not going to touch that. So they just ignored it as if it wasn't there. Well, so then the first FOIA request. We got this back, and I do want to mention to you that sometimes your Freedom of Information Act requests, they stall on these things. They don't come in 1 month or 2 months or 3 months. Some of these requests took me more than a year or more, and the people that were involved in getting them. So in January of 2011, the first FOIA that came back, there was a real simple question that was asked, which was, about who was involved in inside the CDC what input there was from who in their decisions about fluoridation, in their statements about fluoridation. But back to the timeline. In March of 2011, some of you may have heard that some of the nationally respected civil rights leaders in our country, Bernice King, Alveda King, these are in Martin Luther King Jr.'s family, Andrew Young, former UN ambassador and Atlanta mayor, Dr. Gerald Durley, a civil rights leader well known around the United States and around the world. They all had sent, either spoken out on the radio or sent a letter to the Georgia legislature calling for a halt to all water fluoridation in the United States. I had a sneaking suspicion that when that happened, that it was going to turn the pro-fluoride side into overdrive, them responding to it. And these documents, of course, and that we'll talk about a little later, showed that's exactly what happened. The next month, and I'm kind of going through my slides. I was hoping you all can see it. Clint, has anyone seen the slides yet, or?
Well, the feedback I'm getting is no, and it's not clear to me why. So I have made the slides available online to be downloaded. It just takes 2 seconds to download. If you click to the link that I've posted in the chat field on the Screen Share app, as well as on the event page on Facebook for today's event under International Fluoride-Free Teleconference, you can get the slides downloaded very quickly and follow along with us that way. I will continue to broadcast from my computer and hope that it works out, but there's the alternative available to you as of right now. Thank you.
Sure. So in April of 2011, the American Dental Association leadership contacted the Assistant Secretary for Health, Howard Koh, K-O-H, talking about various things. But in the letter that surfaced, that it said that the issue of harm to minorities had, quote, the potential to gain traction. And the ADA was asking for help from the Assistant Secretary of Health in the United States government. Now, I thought that was kind of disturbing, actually. I mean, they were concerned more about traction being gained than, at least from what it was read there, than, hey, maybe there really was disproportionate harm to minorities from fluoride. And, one of the things in the Fluoridegate scandal is that in the past we've all talked about, the CDC and the EPA, these agencies. I think it's time at this point that we start naming names. And that was the name of the first article when we first published the first piece on Fluoridegate. It was called Fluoridegate, Naming Names at the Centers for Disease Control. Well, now it goes even further. It goes up the chain. And you'll see in the FOIA information here, Assistant Secretary for Health Howard Koh has a role in this, and a whole bunch of people in his office. And you can see that in the Freedom of Information Act document. I do recommend, if you have time, to look at them. There's 4 of them that we've got out there on the Internet now. You can go to the website of nidellaw.com if you don't get them here. But there's these documents are worth perusing. One of them is mammoth. It's over 2,400 pages. Another one's about 51 pages. Another one's 4 pages. Another one's 2 pages. So there's a ginormous one, a pretty decent-sized one, and then 2 very small ones. But in 2011, ADA was concerned that the issue of harm to minorities had the potential to gain traction, which is an interesting statement because all the time previously they said there was absolutely no issues, none at all. There wasn't even a controversy about fluoridation. In June of 2011, you'll see in the FOIA documents, Health and Human Services and CDC professionals in the areas of kidney health, minority health, and other professionals, they met with civil rights leaders Dr. Durley and Andrew Young, who had spoken out against water fluoridation. At the meeting, there was heavy involvement by the ADA, American Dental Association, and the National Dental Association, which is the dental association that serves minority dentists, minority communities, etc. And I find it just really interesting that in our ethics complaint in 2007, we spoke about harm to minorities, harm to kidney patients, and these kind of things, and nobody ever said a word until they didn't even act on it. And we said, is it right that you're not actively involving the leaders in the black community, et cetera? And nobody had ever gotten involved from the minority health experts there at CDC, et cetera. But now, when it was time to do damage control, kidney health folks and minority health folks from HHS, these are now being brought in. Very, very telling, and I think a key point in the Fluoridegate scandal. Then in July of 2011, the League of United Latin American Citizens approved a resolution opposing water fluoridation. Now, there was a very large and old Hispanic civil rights organization here in the United States And a super guy by the name of Henry Rodriguez ran interference and helped in this and helped educate people there. And a lady named Mickey Coons out in Texas helped with this. A bunch of other folks. I'm leaving out so many names, and I don't want to offend anyone by doing that because there's just so many I should name. But that created a whole other flap internal to the LULAC organization, League of United Latin American Citizens. But it also started educating members of the Hispanic community here in the United States. And so then in September of that year, just a little while later, suddenly the president of the American Dental Association is addressing the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus that there's no issue with water fluoridation. They even cited the Lilly Center, our little small nonprofit up here in the mountains of North Georgia. They talked about the Lilly Center and saying, you might have heard about what the Lilly Center is saying. And they basically got up there and whitewashed or just went over the whole thing as if it was a non-issue. And to me, this is so disingenuous. It's going to come back to bite them in the backside because they misled our state leaders in the state of Georgia, which is, of course, right here, where the Federal Centers for Disease Control is. Then in December 2011, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators suddenly came up with a resolution, quote, recognizing the importance of community water fluoridation. And I actually contacted one of the key people in that group to ask how was it that this resolution endorsing fluoridation had come about. And the lady said to me, I do want to talk to you. I'm kind of curious about this. I want to get your side on this thing. This is after the resolution had passed. So we were supposed to talk again, and suddenly she stopped returning my phone call. And so I called back and tried several times, and the communication was cut off. Again, part of the Fluoridegate scandal. We're going to find out that damage control efforts were very, very broad, hurried. They brought in resources from around the United States. There's a hole in the dam, in the dike, and the water was starting to pour through, and they needed to plug that hole real quick. And the issue about here is that there's a whole series of issues in the Fluoridegate scandal. Disproportionate harm to minorities is one of those, but there's way more than that. So, Clint, are we doing anything better? Should I just sort of keep going, or?
You're doing great. Just keep going.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
So, those of you, I guess you have not seen, some of you might be seeing the slides. I'm on slide number 12 right now. And I'm talking about the Freedom of Information request telling a shocking story, that the oral health staff alone at CDC have been doing CDC's assessments and crafting CDC's statements about water fluoridation that it's safe. We found out that private sector vested interest dentists are deeply intertwined with the Centers for Disease Control. And I need to say this. There's no daylight between private sector dental organizations and our Centers for Disease Control. If there was that much close work between the anti-fluoridation group that we're in and the CDC, fluoridation would have ended. But because we've been kept away from the discussion tables, because they're just wanting to talk to people that agree with them, that don't place them in an awkward position, that's what has happened here. And, the issue of disproportionate harm and civil rights to minority communities, what you can see in these documents is this issue is not going to go away, and they're having a really thorny time trying to make it go away, and they have been, of course, unsuccessful to that end. So all of the documents provide evidence this time for investigative Fluoridegate scandal hearings. That's the key takeaway, one of the key takeaways. Now is the time more so than ever for investigative Fluoridegate scandal hearings. And I just encourage those who are listening to take these 4 documents, get the PowerPoint slides, et cetera, and show them to your legislators, show them to your water agencies, show them to, and have people, get the original source documents and they can look through them. And they can see very quickly that, like I said, there's no daylight between the ADA and our Centers for Disease Control. This is really disturbing to me, and there's other organizations too, not just the dentists that have played a role in all this. So now I'm on the next slide here, which is slide actually 14, and this is to briefly talk about what I learned in looking through all these FOIA requests. First of all, they're following what we do. The pro-fluoride side they check out our news releases, our conferences, they follow up on who we talked with. I actually found, when I was in Tennessee, that I would go to a certain town, and it was amazing. It was just entirely predictable. I'll go talk with them, and within a couple of days or less, The other side was already there visiting the same people to try to do damage control. So they have a system that goes into effect whenever they get wind, a whiff of something happening in this city or that community. There's a phone tree, if you will, email tree, et cetera, that goes into effect. And interestingly enough, and you're going to see just a little bit in these documents, the Pew Charitable Trusts. Now, this is a real interesting thing. They were brought in their money, their wallet, to be involved in this issue of responding to and containing the issue that is arising here. And I think that the board of directors of the Pew Charitable Trust needs to be made aware of the fact that the information that they, as a board, were fed by the pro-fluoride folks that came and talked to them does not tell the whole story. In fact, it's misleading on the story. This is not just about errors of omission. This is also errors of commission. And so what else did I see in these documents? That they coordinate their responses, both within the federal government and with outside private sector groups. And as Clint mentioned earlier, they're really afraid that news stories and developments will, quote, get legs. They don't want these stories getting the legs of their own, standing up and running on their own. This is about damage control, and damage control. They want to just respond, do a rapid response, and make this issue go away. The problem is, of course, there's so many really neat folks like you all out there that have gotten wind of this. More and more people are finding out. Fluoridation's over with, as far as I'm concerned. Having talked to an awful lot of lawyers and others now who are asking some pretty thorny questions. If I was somebody inside the pro-fluoridation camp, I'd be kind of wondering, okay, who's going to hold me in some contempt of court, or who's going to make me pay a fine, or who's going to make me go on a witness stand? That's going to happen. Those kind of things are going to happen. People are going to be asked to tell some things. And, of course, well, that may not be real comfortable under the glare of the scrutiny of the spotlight, but that is going to happen. They spend their time defending fluoridation rather than doing damage control and coming up with talking points, rather than objectively considering that, hey, maybe, just maybe, fluorides could be causing damage to IQ or harm to people's bones, or what about their thyroid glands? Interestingly enough, I'll just share this. Talking to a lady today, she's had thyroid disease, and her daughter, younger daughter, has thyroid disease. And this lady's bent about this issue. And she was very interested in finding a legal representation. And it's because, you know, when you mess with someone's thyroid, a whole series of not so enjoyable side effects happen. And it's very illustrative to me that more and more people are contacting me, contacting others, saying, how do we get people put under oath? I guess that's one of the key takeaways here from these documents. I'm going to move right into them real quickly. Here's what's going to happen, and this is what needs to happen. It's never happened that fluoridation promoters in private and public sector have been put under oath. I'm talking about by a sharp attorney who can tell when someone's dancing and avoiding questions to answer them, etc. Now's the time to get people put under oath, specific names of people. I'm not talking about some agency like CDC and APA. Yeah, that they have culpability as an agency, but I'm talking about the people in the organization whose job description required that they had a duty of care to do certain key things, and they did not do it. Not only did they fail to do it, in many cases it appears they actively worked with other people to make it so that the public could not really grasp what was going on here, certainly not easily. So I'm going to go down to my first FOIA request, and I'm going to go through these very briefly. I don't intend to go through everything in them because it's just more than we could do, because I want to throw this open for questions. The first one was FOIA 1. It's slide number 15 if you get to it. The request was from an individual who wanted to know if CDC could supply the names, job descriptions, and job titles of everybody in CDC who was currently responsible or in the past responsible for CDC's policy of support for water fluoridation. And it specifically said, I'd like this information not only for folks in the oral health division, but any other people not in that division who had input into the policy supporting water fluoridation. And when you see the FOIA response, you'll be amazed by how brief it is, 3 pages. Basically, it's a list of the oral health directors and then the 2-page job description. They're saying that since 1975, that responsibility for all the statements made about fluoridation, what's going to go public, et cetera, for the decision to support fluoridation was made by the head of oral health. It was made by dentists. And, of course, you can think all kinds of reasons of why that didn't make an awful lot of sense. What do dentists know about harm to kidneys or your brain? and a whole bunch of things. This is just very, very disturbing. The CDC, who has at their disposal and resources of thousands of their own internal employees in minority health and kidney health and toxicologists over at their Agency for Toxic Disease Registry, Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. It's very, here's what I think I would be super for you to do, for those of you who are listening. Take this first FOIA request and show it to every journalist that you can. Show it to every state legislature and federal legislator that you can. And ask them a real simple question. Do you think that CDC dentists could maybe have been just a little bit biased after they've been endorsing fluoridation in how they evaluated fluoride's harmful effects outside the mouth and even in the mouth? This, to me, is the first, foremost, premier thing that you could show to raise the question in people's minds. Well, wait a minute, isn't this the fox guarding the hen house? And clearly it was. So we're going to go down to the next FOIA, which is the real big one. And I want to get through this really quickly, and then we can throw it open for questions. Number 2 is a document. It's a 2,400-page one that shows communications inside CDC with the ADA, with other groups, a whole series of other groups and people, individuals, that shows the deeply intertwined nature of the relationship between the oral health division and the dental division, the oral health division. And there's just so many of them in there. And I'll give you an example. This is really key. I think this is important. If any of you know anyone who's a kidney patient, they can look in the FOIA document on page 655, where the former oral health director, Bill Moss, is sending an email then, and he said, if there's a kidney disease, then more fluoride stays in the body and is deposited in the bones. Okay, so right there, if there was nothing else said, you would think that all kidney patients would at least be due the courtesy of hearing that if you have a failing kidney or impaired kidney function, more and more fluoride is showing up in your bones. And here's what he said. So after many years, a person with chronic kidney disease in a community with 1 part per million fluoride water might have bones that have the same fluoride content, of a person living in a community with 4 times that amount of fluoride in their water. Now bear in mind that EPA was told in the National Research Council that 4 parts per million is a standard that needs to be lowered. But here, this gentleman is the former director of CDC, is saying that a person with 1 part per million could have the same amount of fluoride in their bones as a person who'd been there with 4 parts per million, 4 times that amount. And then he goes on to say in the next slide, there is a lot of uncertainty. That to me is so critical, that people need to understand there is a lot of uncertainty, that statements that say there isn't are just plain not true. So what he said was, it's in contrast to what's on CDC's website today. They say that the safety and effectiveness of fluoride as used at the levels used in a community water fluoridation has been thoroughly documented by scientific and public health organizations, etc. They're saying it's thoroughly documented. At best, that's misleading. At worst, that's a full-on, flat-out lie. And I tend to say, I think most people would see it's the latter. And so then they're saying there's a lot of uncertainty. When the 2006 report from the National Research Council said more research is needed to clarify fluoride's biochemical effects on the brain. So again, how do these things marry up together? There's a lot of uncertainty, and yet it's been thoroughly researched. Now the rest of the document, you can go through it, and I've gotten some emails from people who've taken the time to go through these documents, and I just strongly encourage you. It's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of material. I've been through this quite a bit, and there's a lot I could share with you. But example, there's an email on January 30th, 2010 from Jane McGinley, to Jane McGinley from Kip Duchan at CDC. Jane's with the ADA. And, Kip says, I thought I might clandestinely suggest to you some things. And then he says, I would ask that you not indicate that you got this from me or CDC. Well, now what's he talking about? Well, you can read that to see, but the point being, if you look at a whole series of other communications from Mr. Duchan, you have to ask yourself some questions. What is the nature of the relationship here? And you see in the next slide, this is slide number 29. This is from Mr. Duchan to Jane McGinley at ADA. And Jane had been asking some questions, and so he said, since you have all these questions and since you rank as a special friend with elevated consideration, I am sharing with you, confidentially, so don't pass it on to anyone without asking me first if you can, my most recent review of this information that I prepared for a, quote, special and confidential use, wink, wink. Now that's a quote from there. And you say, okay, well, what is this nature of this elevated consideration? There certainly was a lot of communication between these two people. What was the nature of what was being shared there? And why did they talk so extensively with each other? And again, there's other emails you'll see in the slides where they talk about joint, or I should say coordinated messaging of the EPA with HHS. Now that's a real interesting statement. The federal EPA and the federal HHS decided they were going to jointly or coordinate messaging on fluorides. And I thought EPA was going to do a risk assessment and just sort of let the chips fall where they may. Isn't that what a risk assessment's for? Well, you have to ask yourself, what is this joint messaging? And there's a whole bunch more I could talk about that, but I want to sort of get up here to the rest of this. There's another slide where they talk about they appreciate any heads up they could provide about community water fluoridation census. And they talk about Dr. Conant's Dr. McCullough interview. And he said, note the plans for a media effort on July 3rd. Good luck, it will get lost some in the holiday weekend. You know, it's fascinating to me how you read in this particular one on June 28, 2010, that they were talking about that people are taking our newsletters or Dr. McCullough's newsletters and bringing them into offices and asking questions. And that's something they wanted to deal with. How do they deal with it? And there were just so many things in these huge documents that talk about over and over again, how do we address this? And then they would notify everybody. Oh, Dr. Conant's going somewhere on a book tour. Okay, we got to notify those folks. You're going to this city and that. Here's his book tour agenda. So I'm going to let the appropriate people in the state dental associations know. And, these are the kind of things that I think that if investigative reporters and state legislators see this, it just makes all the sense in the world that what we would have is Fluoridegate hearings. I think some people need to be put under oath. You can put people under oath in more than just court cases. State legislatures and the federal government have authority to put people under oath. I think now is the time to do that. And there's a whole lot here. There's even one in Arkansas when they were trying to mass fluoridate that state from a guy named Dr. Mouden. And Dr. Mouden is saying to Kip Duchamp that he had met with ADH Council Engineering and, quote, legislative liaisons, quote, unquote, parentheses, because we can't say lobbyist. So he's admitting that there's this phrase legislative liaison is used because, it's a lobbyist. We can't say lobbyist. So there's all these documents in there. The question really comes down to what is it that's so what is it that is so much has to be saved by fluoridation? Why is it that they have to act this way instead of just openly sharing all the information? Plenty of other things in our world have changed. The way we addressed hormones and replacement and all kinds of things. Leaded gas. What we have now is an opportunity to change this. So, Clint, I have just about 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to throw it open for questions. Is that a good time to do it?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks.
Okay. I want to do the third FOIA. I would ask that all of you that listen pay special attention to what's called FOIA number 3. It's a civil rights one. And you'll see that Scott mentioned there was a whole bunch of information redacted in this. I think that what we need to have here, we were unable to do a petition to appeal this thing, just through some things that happened. But what I would suggest to you here is a real simple question. Why are all these communications redacted or hidden concerning the issue of fluoride harm to African Americans and other minorities? This is something that I think really needs to be really pushed hard on, because clearly when you look in the FOIA documents, this is a sore point, and they mobilize all kinds of people. You're going to see in there after Andrew Young spoke out and Dr. Gurley spoke out, there was going to be a meeting. I was invited to attend this meeting by one of the attendees, not the meeting convener, but one of the attendees. And so I drove all the way down. It was in June 2011, and I got 10 minutes away, and I received a phone call that I was not going to be able to attend the meeting. Now, there's a story behind this, and I knew at the time that there was a big story behind it. And what these FOIA documents show is that prior to this meeting to talk about the issue of fluoride harm to minorities, a whole series of people, all the way up to the office of the Assistant Secretary of Health, Howard Koh. All kinds of people in CDC, in the National Dental Association, the American Dental Association, all kinds of people got involved in this. And there were some questions that some statements that they were obviously going back and forth very hurriedly to quote. They said, we need maximum coordination right now. That's an actual quote. We need maximum coordination. And they were clearly going to be trying to do something about the fact that Dr. Gurley and Andrew Young had spoken out about harm to minorities. Well, when you look through this, I think this particular issue is the one of the key ones, not the only one, but one of the key ones that we need more FOIA requests about, and we need more information to be gathered. I think this is a real fantastic one that really should come down to the issue of what I call trial by media. I think the more journalists you can get involved in this and seeing what happened, specifically, you know what they said? They said, without stock in here, this meeting's going to be more open. And that doesn't make an awful lot of sense to me. Why would our federal people there talking about this, and yet they, for years wouldn't even talk to us? And what was it about someone who was anti-fluoridation being there that was going to be so difficult? This is not national security. Why did they redact all of this information? And I just would encourage you to submit all kinds of requests, but get journalists involved in submitting the requests too. And I want to share one thing to you that I think is very key about FOIA requests in general. I think it's important that when you do a FOIA request, send a carbon copy to investigative journalists at either the national or local or regional on state levels, etc., so that the people who get the request know it's not you that's looking for the response only, but that other people may be looking for the response because they've seen a copy of the request. I think it's important to do that. And, also, when you do this, there's a lot more here that we could all sort of dive into, and I understand everyone has limited time. But as Scott Edwards mentioned, be a little bit sort of select in what you ask for, but recognize that the other side, this is a real lightning rod. It took years to get some of these requests out of them when they're not supposed to take that long. And so I think if enough people and enough journalists and enough legislators do requests for documents, you can see, for instance, that the Pew Charitable Trust is involved here. I think it'd be really cool to have an investigation into just how deep and close is the relationship with Pew, with the CDC and HHS. Why not ask the question? I'm not saying there's anything improper, but why not ask the question? There's a whole bunch of money that's been sunk in by Pew to this, and I think the board of directors at Pew deserves a chance to hear from some of us. I think they would be very well served to find out maybe to ask themselves, are we thinking good money after bad? And maybe they need to know some of the genesis of all this. That FOIA number 2 document, you can do a search request. It has been converted to OCR, optical character recognition format. So with the advanced versions of Adobe, you can type in the word Pew, you can type in the word, anybody's last name, and it'll pull up all the documents in there that you can sort by last name. You can see what they said about Dr. Connick. You can see what they said about me. You can see what they said about the group in your area. They were scared about Moms Against Fluoridation, obviously. They were concerned about these groups that start getting traction. And they're concerned enough that they follow this and they have all this interaction. So I think the third one on civil rights, particularly, but not only that, needs to be pursued. The last one is FOIA 4 on the statistics about dental fluorosis. You remember publication 53 that came out, I guess, in 2011 that said that 41% of 12 to 15-year-olds have some form of fluorosis. Wasn't it funny to you that they only listed it by age? What about the race data? And we submitted it, and they said, well, anything that we use in it is shown there. Well, that didn't answer our question. We wanted the background data. We wanted all of the data. And they said, well, what's used in it is what's there. No, I didn't ask you what you used. I asked you what the whole original documents were. So you see there's all these kind of things that they do. They try to use these little statements. So I guess I'm going to draw it to a close there and throw it open if you have any questions. Or Clint, how would you like to proceed?
Well. What a lot of information to digest, Daniel. Thank you so much. It paints a picture, and it really validates what so many of us suspected for so long. It's really wonderful, in fact, to be able to have the certainty, the confidence to speak about these coordinating entities and have documentary proof so that we're not just speculating any longer. Thank you so much for this work. I have a question right away, having seen the documents myself, and the documents are available for download from the email that I sent out to everyone inviting you to today's event, as well as on nidellelaw.com, which you can find linked on the event page on Facebook today. Get those documents, read them. But I noticed that there aren't any documents there any later than, I think, 2011 or 2012. So what about the more recent documents?
Well, that's a really interesting point. I'm only one person, and it's been, I guess I'll put it sort of succinctly, let's just say this has not been an easy journey trying to get all this information. There have been some super people helping me and who helped with these FOIA requests. It wasn't just me. And that speaks to something else that I will share. Sometimes it's useful to have someone else submit the FOIA rather than you. It can be a legislator. It can be a state senator, or it can be a federal senator or congressman. It can be, I think it's really important that the information get out, not necessarily who it's from. Sometimes, in fact, if it's come from an average citizen, it's better, or it might that's not known as a fluoride activist, or maybe if it comes from a well-known person, it's better. Depends on the individual, the topic that's being covered. But as to your point, Clint, about the older information, you're right. I have at least 20 different ideas of things that I would have loved to have done, but it's just been a little challenging for me sometimes to just do this while our Lilly Center is very, very tiny, our nonprofit, and we just haven't had the resources to do some of the things that we have wanted to do. I think it's very important that everyone who hears this understands what the other side does not want is what's already happening, is that this thing is getting legs. The more media look into this, as well as the historical documents, which we haven't even talked about today, the more this is looked at by the media and by legislators, the more probing Fluoridegate questions are being asked. And, there's all this media that's already happening, like in Psychology Today and the news from Israel banning fluoridation, et cetera. We're not in a stage anymore where they said, oh, these are just wacko people and don't pay attention to the weirdos. This has got mainstream attention now. And so now's the time to finish this thing, to get it over with. And we have an opportunity. I'm a big believer in recognizing and capitalizing on windows of opportunity. These documents can serve as a springboard to a whole bunch of other really thorny questions. And I would just encourage people to look. There was an issue with cost. You have to be aware that if you ask too big of a question, they may charge you. But sometimes getting a nonprofit or a journalist or someone who catches a vision for this to get involved is very useful. But don't put all your eggs in one basket in the FOIA basket either. I think it's important to just get people asking questions, sort of the collective weight of questions that are now being asked. I think is really critical. There's a lot of people that were unwitting allies in promoting fluoride, and those people are starting to think, you know what, I think I need to put some daylight between me and these dentists. And that's exactly what we want.
Okay, great. So then the documents, is it that the date sort of ended somewhere in 2012? Is that because it's not because you requested specifically that date range, but rather they didn't, or is it that it's been that long since you initially requested it? Like, how come we don't have 2013, 2014?
Right, and that's exactly right. It took quite a while for some of these documents to even get returned to us. So there was a cutoff up to a certain point, then the request was made. And then, of course, all that time ensued just getting the documents back. So there are several reasons why it's not all the way up to current. But, this is the time now for people to pursue more of them. Absolutely. You could go after the same agencies or different organizations, different last names, different types of questions, things about like, well, what has CDC, remember, this went up the chain. FDA, HHS, all kinds of people are involved. So this is not just CDC anymore. And this was brought in. They brought in all kinds of people to deal with just the issue of minority harm. So think broadly in terms of other organizations to go after, but also more modern time frames to go after. And don't forget the Pew thing. Remember, Pew has been sending emails back and forth, and Pew has been, involved in this by funding the way they respond. And what do they do, with those various big cities here where we had some victories. So I would just encourage people to, in your area or in your state, get the media involved. And, they can contact me if they'd like. They can contact Paul Conant or Carol Koff, the media officer, or UClint. There's just a lot of resources where people can, the reporters can turn to get good quotes and further questions.
Okay, great. And then as far as the evidence for an exaggerated harm to Black Americans, Black folks, where can I send people to see that? Is it Fluoridegate on YouTube? Do you think that would be a good place, or what would you recommend?
I'm going to be really. The Fluoride Action Network website has a great environmental justice section,
okay.
And also Action PA. Mike Ewald's website has some information. I'm going to confess to you, we're so tiny right now. I'm almost embarrassed to say my own website, which is it's nextstagescience.org. After Dr. Lilly passed away this year, it's just been very challenging for us to sort of reorient and keep going. And my website, all it basically has on it is just one or two Fluoridegate documents, has a donate button and maybe an intro page, and that's it. I'm embarrassed to say I don't have all the information on my website. There's plenty of people like Moms Against Fluoridation and Fluoride Action Network and Mike Ewald's Action PA that have quite a bit of, and maybe Clint, maybe you even know, you mentioned a name there, I wasn't quite sure what you're talking about, where they can get some of these, the science, because there's strong science showing that there's certainly more dental fluorosis. Of course, we know that, I'll give you an example. In Atlanta, did you know that Atlanta has 40% higher kidney failure rate than the rest of the country? 40% higher. And why is that? Well, southern diet, hot climate, and large black population. And of course, as you know, the black community has a significantly higher rate of kidney disease. So wouldn't you think it would be fair that the Centers for Disease Control would share the fact that kidney patients are known to be a susceptible subgroup, particularly vulnerable to harmful fluorides, according to the National Research Council? But they haven't done that. And that's going to come out now. We need that to come out in the major cities, that if you live in a major city or if you know anyone who has kidney disease or who's a diabetic, these are the parts of the story that need to be told to the representatives in those communities.